Hi, this is Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today with a new dyeing experiment. I have spent the day creating speckled yarn using various techniques, and I thought it would be fun to use some of the leftover dye to create some speckled roving. I have here some 100% wool Peruvian highland roving from KnitPicks. There's 100 grams of fiber, and I have already pre-soaked it in a bath of 16 cups of water and 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. I allowed this to soak overnight, but really 30 minutes or until the fibers are completely saturated would be sufficient. I have here 5 food coloring based dyes, and these were created by mixing a quarter cup of water with 6 or 7 drops of food coloring. And we've got 6 drops of yellow, 6 drops of red, 3 drops red, 3 drops yellow, 2 drops red, 5 drops yellow, and 5 drops green, 1 drop red. And so this is kind of a fall Thanksgiving-y type colorway. And all of the food coloring was from this McCormick's. Okay. Now I have wrung out most of the liquid from the fiber, but it is still actually pretty drippy. When I was arranging it back and forth in this steamer basket for my canning pot, the water was dripping off of the fiber. So my plan is to apply the dye in speckled dots to the fiber, and then I'm going to steam this in my canning pot to set the color. I'm only wearing gloves so I don't dye myself. I am going to apply the dye to the yarn using this medicine eyedropper that came with some medication that my kids had. And I'm going to apply it to the fiber in drops. Now, unlike speckled yarn, the concept of speckled fiber, funny, when the dye beads versus going directly in. Those parts must be slightly drier. The concept of speckled fiber is a little different than speckled, funny, that one rolled off. It's a little different than speckled yarn because, alright, well this is kind of weirding me out a little bit. Gonna break the bubbles. Okay, the reason why the concept of speckled fiber, oh funny, look at the colors spread a bit. Well, this will be really pretty, even if it's not super speckled. Okay, I'm still trying to add a drop at a time, but I'm actually gonna touch the fiber as I do it, so that way the dye goes in. As I have said previously on this channel, one person can dye fiber in many different ways. And so it really depends on the person how the fiber turns out. So someone could pick out all the green patches and spin them together, or depending on if you go down the whole length at once or go in separate different sections, you could end up with smaller or longer repeats of color. But the plan here is to have a lot of white and then some of these other colors. And what I learned with the yarn is that I will probably have to, it's so weird that it's beading. It must be from the like oils in the fiber. Because since it was wet, I was expecting this not to bead up. I guess you can't really see. But yeah, so as I learned, sorry guys, this video is, I keep losing my train of thought. But as I learned when I did the speckled yarn, a lot of times I would have to turn the yarn around multiple times because I kept finding big white patches because sometimes like all the specks would be on one strand. And I actually don't even mind, I think, if I fill in entirely one side and then the other side is pretty white. Maybe I do mind. But nevertheless, it is fun to kind of color fiber in this polka dot kind of way. Even when the dyes don't immediately sink into the yarn. Come on, guys. Ooh, you know what would be really fun? To do the dry Kool-Aid technique on fiber like this. So in one of my dyeing videos that I have just published on the channel, I used dry Kool-Aid and applied it with a fork to the fiber to create a speckled yarn. So that would be kind of fun. I've done dry Kool-Aid on fiber before, but getting those really tiny patches of color would be pretty fun. But one reason why I'm excited about doing this speckled fiber like this is that these really small repeats of color, even though they could stretch pretty far once spun, they can also mix together in a kind of cool way. So, depending on how it is spun, it could end up being pretty cool. If you wanted each dot to have a darker color, then you could use more dye in these dye mixtures than I did. It's funny when sometimes it just like disappears into the fiber and then sometimes it beads on top. Hopefully I'm not blocking you too much. But it's funny because this ends up looking like something that my son might create. Yeah, I think instead of completely turning the fiber over, I will just lift sections to add color to different areas. Hopefully I won't end up with too many huge white sections. I mean, obviously I expect there to be a lot of white around the fiber, but I still want there to be like speckles of color and stuff. So turning over sections to reach the underside is pretty important. So then you have sections where you can have multiple colors come through. So I don't know, this is pretty fun. I am going to continue on speckling my fiber and we'll be back when I'm ready to steam it. So as I was moving the fiber around, some pretty interesting things happened. As the colors sink in, they're kind of spreading, and I guess from further back it looks like a polka dot, but if you zoom in, you know, the top looks like it's getting pretty pale. If you pull the fibers out, there's actually color penetration all the way through. So it's kind of like this mottled, it almost feels impressionist-like. So I'm currently waiting for the steam pot to heat up. I've just covered the bottom with about 2 inches of water and added a big dash of salt. And so once that starts boiling, I will put the steam basket in the pot and we'll start heating it up. But I think that we're gonna get this like really cool pastel-y kind of thing going on, and so I'm pretty excited about that. So we are definitely boiling. It's funny, in a lot of my videos I don't want to hit a boil. So I'm not used to filming while at a rolling boil. And now I am merely going to set my fiber on top. And I'm going to cover this and let it steam for 30 minutes because that was sufficient when I was dealing with the yarn. But I am going to reduce the heat some because it does not need to be at such a strong boil to be nice and steamy. And now you can't see anything because I covered it with the lid. But I will be back in 30 minutes. Minutes have passed. And look at how pale my yarn is looking. Ooh, it is, whoops. Except for a few patches and some, I don't know if you can really see, but there's some beads of color still in there. But yeah, it looks like the color has soaked in and is looking pretty cool. I don't want to agitate the yarn or the fiber right now because I don't want to risk felting it, but I am pretty excited. I like that it looks kind of hazy and opaque. So once this cools completely, we will wash it with some dish soap and lukewarm water very carefully. I'm getting ready to wash the fiber. I'm using some lukewarm water and dish soap, and I plan to gently rinse the fiber until the water runs clear. I don't want to agitate the fiber too much because I don't want to risk anything, but here is a pretty color, and we've got these like great pastel-y patches. Not a lot of immediate runoff. I guess I don't really know what I was expecting, but I thought that there would be some places where there might still be color on the surface. Some might come out, but anyway, I am going to wash the fiber until there's no soap left and the water, as long as the water remains clear, and then I am going to hang it up to dry. So I will see you next when we're ready to look at the finished roving. Here is our dried roving. The colors turned out pretty pale, and the way that they go through the fiber is kind of reminiscent of a snow cone for me. That when you add the bright color to it, it kind of dilutes and goes throughout the shaved ice to give you a paler color. Let's take a closer look. So while the colors are pale, there's very much colorful specks that go throughout this roving. And for comparison, here is the yarn that I dyed with the exact same dye mixtures using the same kind of technique to set the heat and add the food coloring to the fiber. The one main difference is that the roving was wetter when I applied the dye than the yarn was. But also when I was adding the food coloring to the yarn, it did not beat up in the way that it did on the roving. But even though the speckled roving has much bigger specks overall, when compared to the yarns that I've done, I'm still really excited about adding these small patches of color. And I think that when I spin this fiber into yarn, I can get something really cool. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for sticking with me for this dyeing experiment. I'll see you next time.